For 12,000 years, the Celestial Accord governed the spiral arm, a tapestry of ancient civilizations woven together by law, tradition, and shared history. To them, humanity were mere children, loud, chaotic, and disrespectful of the sacred galactic order. So, when Earth dared to defy an edict to save a pre-sentient species from a Accord-approved mining operation, the punishment was severe, final, and meant to be a death sentence. Banished. Cut off from the hyperlane network, all treaties void, their colonies stripped away, and Sol system quarantined behind a formidable barrier of folded space. The Council watched, expecting the echoes of human radio signals to fade into silent oblivion within a few generations, a cautionary tale of arrogance extinguished. They were wrong. They silenced a voice, not a spirit. They buried a seed, not a corpse. For while the Accord measured time in millennia and progress in cautious increments, humanity counted their exile in heartbeats and measured their rage in the thunder of new engines. The galaxy turned its back, confident the story was over. It had, in fact, just begun. Now, the quarantine field is failing, not from decay, but from a pressure from within. Something is coming home. And it is not coming in peace. It is coming for everything. Part 1. The Grand Concourse of the Celestial Accord was a symphony in stone and light, a mile-long cavern of crystalline architecture that had witnessed the rise and fall of species before humanity had mastered fire. Today, it held its breath. Ambassador Eris Thorn of Earth stood alone on the polished obsidian floor, a small, sharp figure in a simple gray suit amidst a sea of iridescent robes, feather crests, and chitinous splendor. The air hummed with the subharmonic disapproval of 100 assembled species. The verdict is unanimous, Speaker Valerius of the Vel, his voice a cascade of liquid notes that translated into cold precision through the universal implant. The human species, in its reckless defiance of Accord Directive Prime, non-interference with designated resource worlds, has demonstrated a profound and dangerous instability. You placed the potential of an unevolved amphibian species above the economic stability of 3 star systems. Thorn's voice was quiet, but it carried a crack of flint in the cathedral's silence. We placed life above profit. The Golo were on the cusp of sentience. The Terran mining lasers would have sterilized their world and its 3 billion years of evolutionary potential. We offered alternative sites, technology to minimize impact. You offered human solutions, interrupted the Silix ambassador, a floating mass of gentle fronds that now pulsed a dull, angry crimson. You assume your frantic, short-lived urgency is a virtue. It is chaos. The Terran have mined that asteroid belt for 8,000 years. Their claim is older than your written history. And our claim to basic morality is older than stardust. Thorn shot back, a flicker of the fire that had damned them. It was the wrong thing to say. A ripple of disdain moved through the assembly. Morality was a planetary concept, not a galactic one. Order was paramount. Valerius extended a long, slender limb. The Accord cannot tolerate a member who values individual moral impulses over collective law. Your species is hereby sentenced to perdition's exile. All human colonies outside the Sol system are forfeit, their populations to be relocated under Accord stewardship. The Sol system will be enclosed within a folded space quarantine field. All hyperlane access, communication channels, and trade routes to humanity are permanently severed. You are a closed book. May you find peace, or oblivion, in your isolation. The words were a physical blow. Thorn's composure shattered. You can't. This is genocide by slow decay. Our colonies are self-sufficient. You have no right. We have every right, Valerius said, finality ringing in the tone. The quarantine activates in one standard cycle. Your ship will be permitted to return to Sol. It will be the last human vessel to ever leave it. Take him away. The journey back to Earth was a funeral procession. Thorn, broken, addressed a shattered global assembly from a lonely podium. He showed them the recordings, the cold faces of the council, the dismissal, the sentence. The world watched in stunned silence, then erupted in a global scream of rage, fear, and betrayal. But, in the silence that followed the panic, a different sound emerged. It started in the engineering hubs on Mars, in the orbital shipyards over Earth, in the underground labs on Luna. It was the sound of schematics being called up, of welders igniting, of furious, focused typing. It was not the sound of surrender. It was the sound of a lock being clicked open from the inside. A woman named Ilara Vance, head of the newly formed and clandestine exile directorate, put it to the world's remaining leaders in a secure bunker. They think they've put us in a cage. They think the story ends here. They have given us the one thing they never could while we were part of their club, a unified enemy, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The first decade was desperation. The loss of off-world resources triggered global shortages. The quarantine field, a shimmering, soap bubble distortion at the edge of the solar system, was impenetrable, a one-way barrier to both matter and signal. Earth was truly alone. But humanity, faced with extinction, did not turn on itself. It turned outward, towards the empty dark within their prison. The directive's first, audacious project was the Forge. A massive shipyard constructed inside the hollowed-out asteroid series, powered by stolen Accord tech and 1,000 improvised human innovations. Their ships could not use hyperlanes, those were closed. So they worked on something else, the skip drive. Not elegant, not efficient, and violently dangerous. It didn't travel through folded space, it punched a temporary, brutal hole through it, like a hammer through glass. It was slow, jarring, and had a terrifyingly high failure rate. But it worked. Within a generation, humanity had a fleet of ugly, brutalist warships with skip drives, vessels that looked like floating mountains of weapons and armor, devoid of the graceful aesthetics of Accord design. Meanwhile, on Earth, a social revolution solidified. The old nations blurred under the banner of Terran unity. Resources were allocated with a ruthless, wartime efficiency. Science was directed not towards understanding the galaxy, but towards surpassing it. Their materials science, born from necessity, created alloys the Accord considered theoretical. Their weapons, designed to fight unknown future threats, focused on sheer, overwhelming power and adaptive AI targeting. 50 years after exile, the first test. A skip-drive frigate, the Unyielding, vanished from the Sol system and reappeared, 3 months later, in the bleak void beyond the quarantine. They were free. And they saw a galaxy that had moved on. Monitoring passive Accord communications, they learned Earth was a forgotten lesson, a ghost story told to unruly young species. The human colonies had been integrated, their cultures fading. The Gola, the very species Earth had tried to save, had been quietly sterilized by the Terran once the Accord's attention shifted. Captain Reed of the Unyielding sent a single, tight beam pulse back through the quarantine, a data packet containing 2 things, the star charts of the empty, unclaimable regions the Accord ignored, and 1 sentence, the garden is rotten. We will build a new one. Prepare the harvest. The message was received. In the Forge of series, the hammering of metal grew louder. The Exile Directorate, now simply the Terran Command, looked at the maps. The Accord owned the shining core worlds, the fertile gardens. But the galaxy was vast. There were dead systems, nebula clouds, rogue planets, places the ancient powers saw as worthless. Humanity saw them as fortresses, as mines, as homes. The Great Silence, as the exile was called by the Accord, was not a period of mourning. It had been the long, deep breath before the leap. Part 2. The garden was Accord terminology for the civilized, hyperlane-connected swath of the spiral arm. Beyond it lay the waste, a sprawling, chaotic graveyard of dead stars, unstable nebulae, and planetary debris the Accord deemed unnavigable and resource-barren. It was here, in the crushing silence of a binary pulsar system designated PSR 447, that humanity planted its first flag. The operation, codenamed Hotfire, was a testament to human insanity by galactic standards. A convoy of 10 skip-drive colony ships, each a hulking beast of spunrock and boronite armor, shuddered into reality near a frozen, iron-rich planetoid. There was no air, no water, no hope. The Accord scanners would have registered nothing but background radiation. But, from the bellies of these ships spilled not just colonists, but entire prefabricated subterranean habitats, geothermal taps, and molecular forges. Within a standard year, the planetoid renamed Anvil housed a bustling city of 500,000 in its warm, lit depths. Its surface was a forest of weaponized mass drivers and sensor arrays, disguised as natural geological formations. Anvil was the blueprint. Over the next century, dozens of such outposts sprang up in the waste. Sentinel Station, hidden in the electromagnetic maelstrom of a gas giant. Black Reach, a mining colony tunneling through a continent-sized diamond asteroid. These were not just settlements, they were living warships, fortresses designed to withstand siege and disappear from scans. The Terran diaspora was a silent, secret bloom in the galactic dark. Back in Sol, the heart of the new empire beat stronger. The Forge had evolved into the Armada Corps, a network of shipyards spanning the solar system. The skip drive, now refined into the slightly less lethal skip jump, was fitted into vessels of terrifying purpose. The Vengeance-class dreadnought was the symbol, 5 kilometers of angular, slab-sided armor, mounting a primary weapon called the Rift Cannon, a device that used a modified skip field to literally tear a temporary micro-black hole in the path of an enemy fleet. It was messy, horrifying, and utterly unforgiving. Command of this growing shadow fleet fell to people like Admiral Kaito Silva, a third-generation exile who had never known a sky not framed by the quarantine field shimmer. His face was hard, his eyes holding the cold light of the stars he'd only ever studied in simulations that were now his tactical maps. The Accord fights with precision, he told his captains in a briefing deep inside Luna Command. They target engines, disable shields, demand surrender. Their warfare is a duel. Ours will be a demolition. We cannot afford their grace. Every engagement must be total, decisive, and leave no witnesses who could report our capabilities. Their first chance to test this doctrine came unexpectedly. A Terran scout vessel, the Whisper, monitoring the fringes of Accord space, detected a distress signal. It was from a small, unaffiliated merchant convoy being raided by a Tkaran marauder, a vessel of the very species that had mined the Gola to extinction. The Tkaran were minor Accord members, bullies licensed by the greater powers. The Whisper's captain, Anya Sharma, had orders: observe, never engage. But the distress call was from a species of gentle avian traders, the Lear, who were famously pacifist. The Tkaran weren't just robbing them, they were tearing their ships apart for sport, venting crew into space. Sharma saw the ghost of the Gola in the unfolding massacre. She made a choice. She sent a hyperpulse to Anvil and activated her skip jump. The Tkaran Marauder, a spiked, organic-looking ship, was toying with its prey when space behind it ripped. The Whisper was alone, a fraction of the Marauder's size. The Tkaran commander laughed, a sound like grinding stones, and opened fire. But the Whisper didn't try to dodge. It took the hits on its absurdly thick armor, sparks flying from composite plating that Tkaran scanners couldn't even classify. Then, it returned fire. Not with plasma bolts, but with a stream of hypervelocity tungsten rods. They punched through the Marauder's shields and, hull-like paper, detonating deep inside. Before the shocked Tkaran could regroup, space ripped again. Not once, but 3 times. The Unyielding, now a grizzled veteran, and 2 new Vengeance-class ships, the Righteous Fury and Hammer of Soul, emerged. Admiral Silva's voice crackled across a wideband channel the Tkaran could hear. Terran vessel. You are engaged in acts of piracy and genocide against non-combatants. Stand down and prepare to be boarded. The Tkaran, arrogant and furious, responded with a full barrage. It was the last mistake they ever made. The Terran ships didn't maneuver like Accord vessels. They turned, ponderously, presenting their broadsides. Then, they fired. Mass-driver salvos mixed with plasma that burned hotter than anything in the Tkaran database. The Marauder's shields failed in seconds. The Righteous Fury then fired its experimental rift cannon. Space in front of the Tkaran ship wrinkled and screamed. A pinpoint of impossible darkness appeared, sucking in light and debris before vanishing with a concussive blast of hawking radiation. The Marauder was simply gone, erased from the middle, its bow and stern spinning away as molten slag. The silence on the Lear frequencies was absolute. Then, a trembling signal. Saviors, who are you? Admiral Silva responded, his face visible on their screens, a human face, a species forgotten for a century. We are Terran. Your attackers are destroyed. Take your wounded and go. Tell others what you saw here. Tell them the waste is no longer empty. Tell them the Banished have returned. The Lear, grateful and terrified, fled. They would tell the tale. The first crack in the Accord's wall of silence had been made. But Silva knew the clock was now ticking. He looked at the wreckage of the Terran ship. Scavenge everything. Every shred of data, every black box. Then, purge this location with plasma fire. The Accord will come looking. We must be ready. Move the fleet to Rally Point Delta. He allowed himself a thin, cold smile. Let them look into the dark. Let them wonder what else is looking back. Part 3. The Lear tale was dismissed as radiation-induced hysteria by the Terran authorities. A single lost marauder was a statistic, not a crisis. But whispers have a way of traveling in the bazaars and lower decks of the galaxy. Stories of ghost ships from the waste, of impossible weapons and armor, of a forgotten species named Terran began to seep into the galactic subconscious. The Accord High Council, when a minor functionary dared to mention the rumors, silenced him with a look. The human matter was closed. Yet, in the sterile halls of the Accord Intelligence Directorate, a single analyst named Kalen of the Vel took notice. Vel were methodical, their logic circuits, both biological and, implanted, incapable of dismissing data. The Lear account was too consistent, and the sensor ghosts from that sector, though faint, showed energy signatures that defied classification. Most telling was the complete absence of the Terran Marauder's black box signal, a device designed to survive supernovas. Something had not just destroyed it, but unmade it. Kalen's report was buried under layers of bureaucratic inertia, but he was Vel. He did not stop. He began a quiet, unauthorized project, Spectre Analysis. Using old pre-exile files on human psychology and military history, he built a predictive model. The conclusions were chilling. If humanity had survived, they would not be hiding in fear. They would be building. They would be angry. And their strategic doctrine would be based on asymmetry, striking where the Accord was weakest, not strongest. His theory was proven not by his own people, but by the Boral. The Boral were an up-and-coming mercantile species, aggressive and expansionist, recently granted probationary membership in the Accord. Seeing the waste as untapped real estate, they sent a survey fleet into a nebula the Accord charts labeled toxic, useless. The Boral fleet vanished. Not with a distress call, but with a final, fragmented transmission of pure panic, metal mountains, light that eats ships, they are everywhere, followed by a scream of static. This could not be ignored. The Boral demanded an Accord investigation. A small task force, led by the venerable Accord battlecruiser Shining Resolve and, including Kalen as an observer, was dispatched. They found nothing. No debris, no energy residue. Just the cold, swirling gases of the nebula. The Shining Resolve's captain declared it a navigational accident, likely a chain reaction engine failure. Kalen, studying his custom scanners, saw something else, faint, fractal patterns in the nebula's dust patterns consistent with rapid, localized spacetime distortion. Skip-jump signatures. He was on the observation deck when it happened. One moment, the nebula was empty. The next, space around the Accord task force crystallized. A dozen Terran warships slipped into reality with a silence more deafening than any explosion. They were monstrous. No graceful curves, just brutal angles and armor plating thick enough to land shuttles on. Their hulls were a non-reflective black, drinking in the nebula's faint light. A channel opened. No visual, just a voice, synthesized and cold. Accord vessel Shining Resolve. You have entered sovereign Terran space. Power down your drives and weapons. Submit to boarding for inspection. The Accord captain, proud and incredulous, responded with haughty defiance. Sovereign space? This is unclaimed nebula. Identify yourselves immediately or be fired upon. The response was a single word. Acknowledged. The Terran ships moved. They didn't dance, they bullied their way through space. The Shining Resolve fired its main plasma lances, beams that could melt continents. They impacted the lead Terran dreadnought's shields, flaring brilliantly, and then sputtered out. The dreadnought's shield harmonics had adapted and neutralized them within seconds. Before the Accord crew could process this, the Terran fleet returned fire. It was not a battle, it was an industrial accident happening to a fleet. Mass driver rounds the size of buildings slammed into hulls. Plasma streams of a violet hue, hotter than the core of a star, slice through armor. And, then, the centerpiece. The Terran flagship, a ship designated Terra's Reckoning, fired its primary weapon. A beam of distorted gravity lanced out, not at the shining Resolve, but at the space beside it. That space collapsed, imploding into a momentary singularity that shredded 2 escort frigates into atomized streams before snapping back to normal. The display was not just destructive, it was a violation of known physics. The shining Resolve, crippled and bleeding atmosphere, drifted. The Terran comms crackled again, the same cold voice. Your technology is outdated. Your doctrine is obsolete. You are a message. Return to your council. Show them this recording. Tell them the quarantine they built has a door. And we have the key. The diaspora is not hiding. It is waiting. The next Accord ship that enters our space will not be allowed to leave. This is your only warning. Kalen, recording everything, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the vacuum outside. He had been right. Humanity had not just survived, they had evolved into something fierce and terrible. As the crippled shining Resolve limped into hyperlane, Kalen looked back at the nebula. The Terran fleet was gone, vanished back into the dark. But the message was seared into his mind. The galaxy was no longer a tidy garden. The wolves were inside, and they had built their own fences. Part for the holographic recording from the shining Resolve played in the heart of the Celestial Accord's high sanctum. The air, usually thick with the scent of incense and ozone, was now charged with a colder, sharper fear. The graceful lords of the galaxy watched a dreadnought of their own be dismantled by brutish monsters from the dark. When the recording ended, the silence was profound. Speaker Valerius, older now, his carapace dulled, was the first to speak, his liquid voice brittle. It is a trick. A phantom. Some rogue faction using salvaged human tech and terror tactics. The energy signatures are not salvaged, Kalen stated flatly, risking everything by speaking unbidden. They are advancements. The gravitational weapon utilizes a principles we considered purely theoretical. Their shield modulation adapts in real time. This is not a remnant, Speaker. It is a civilization that has spent a century in focused, furious development, with no constraints, no oversight, and a deep, abiding grudge. The council erupted. Denial, anger, plans for immediate, overwhelming retribution. They would gather the Grand Armada and scour the waste until every human outpost was dust. But cooler, more strategic minds prevailed. The military advisors pointed out the terrifying implications. Humanity held territory in the most hostile, uncharted regions. A conventional invasion would be a logistical nightmare and a bloodbath. Their weapons were unknown. Their defenses were untested. To attack blindly was folly. Thus began the Silent War, a conflict fought not in the void, but in the shadows of diplomacy, espionage, and economics. The Accord's first move was subtle. They imposed sanctions and stability inspections on any species caught trading with unregistered entities from the waste. They seeded rumors that the Terrans were pirates, slavers, a disease. They attempted to strangle the nascent human empire before it could breathe. It failed. The Terran economy was not based on galactic trade. It was based on the brutal, efficient mining of dead worlds and the genius of their molecular forges. They didn't need the Accord's goods, they made their own, better and tougher. And the species living under the Accord's heel, the downtrodden, the exploited, the ones who remembered the Lear tale, saw a different story. A smuggler from the reptilian Tari, a species used as cannon fodder in Accord border disputes, made the first real contact. His ship, fleeing Accord regulators, limped into a dead system with a malfunctioning drive. He was out of fuel, out of hope. Then, a ship, black and angular, emerged from behind a moon. He prepared to die. Instead, they boarded, fixed his drive with terrifying efficiency, and gave him a canister of metallic hydrogen fuel more pure than anything he'd ever seen. Why? The Tari smuggler rasped. The Terran Marine, her face obscured by a helmet that showed only a dark visor, responded simply. The Accord takes. We build. Tell your people there is another way. She gave him a data crystal before leaving. It contained schematics for a simple, robust ion engine design far superior to the outdated ones the Accord sold the Tari at inflated prices. The crystal spread through the Tari undercities like wildfire. Similar incidents happened with other marginalized species. The Terrans didn't offer grand alliances or flowery promises. They offered tools, better farming techniques for resource-poor worlds, simple medical tech to combat Accord-priced pharmaceuticals, unjammable communication networks. They asked for nothing in return but silence and, if possible, information on Accord fleet movements. A galaxy-wide underground was born, not through conquest, but through stark, practical solidarity. Humanity became a whispered legend, the Ghost Builders, the Iron Angels. They were the proof that the Accord's power was not absolute, that its benevolence was a conditional lie. The Accord's response escalated. They deployed hunter-killer fleets to patrol the fringes of the waste, attempting to intercept these contraband exchanges. They captured a Terran courier vessel, the Stalwart. Expecting to crack its computers and find the location of their homeworlds, they instead triggered a fractal data scramble that melted the ship's core and the brains of the Vel scientists trying to access it. The only thing recovered was a final, broadcasted audio message on an old, common frequency: "You cannot cage an idea. You cannot quarantine hope. Every world you squeeze creates another friend for us." Frustration turned to desperation in the Accord leadership. A faction led by a hawkish Terran admiral named Gorlak proposed a brutal solution: find a human world and glass it. Make an example so horrifying it would shatter their myth. Intelligence, pieced together from 1,000 failed probes, suggested a likely target, a system deep in the waste with the codename Anvil. The stage was set for the first true clash of empires. Admiral Gorlak assembled a fleet of 20 of the Accord's finest battlecruisers, a force designed to pacify rebellious star systems. They called it Operation Cleansing Fire. Admiral Kaito Silva, in his command chair aboard the Terra's Reckoning, watched the Accord fleet's progress through the reports of a dozen sympathetic species in adjacent sectors. He had expected this. Anvil was not just a colony, it was a trapdoor spider's burrow. "Let them come," he said to his bridge crew, their faces lit by tactical holograms. "Let them see the anvil. And, then, let them meet the hammer." Part 5 The Accord Armada, a glittering spear of polished chrome and glowing energy conduits, tore into the anvil system with the solemn majesty of wrathful gods. Admiral Gorlak watched the frozen, pockmarked planetoid on his viewscreen with disdain. This is their fortress? A dead rock. All vessels, target the largest subterranean energy signature. Burn it to the core. As one, the 20 battlecruisers powered their primary weapons. Beams of star-hot plasma, capable of cracking planetary crusts, lanced downward and splashed harmlessly against a shimmering, honeycombed energy shield that flickered into existence over the entire planetoid. The shield didn't just absorb the energy, it redistributed it, channeling the fury across a planetary-scale network of capacitors buried deep within the iron core. "What is this?" Gorlak roared. "Maximum power. Fire again." As the Accord fleet focused its wrath on the unyielding shield, space around them began to stir. From behind the system's two barren moons, from within the radiation belts of the gas giant, from the shadow of the star itself, Terran ships slipped into reality. Not dozens. Hundreds. They were of every class, the mountainous dreadnoughts, swift frigates like steel hornets, and carriers that disgorged swarms of AI-piloted drones that moved with terrifying, swarm intelligence coordination. The anvil's surface then erupted. Not with explosions, but with launch silos. Thousands of missiles, each tipped with a miniaturized skipfield generator, streaked upward. They didn't target the ships, they targeted the space around the fleet. The resulting cascade of microsingularities and spatial distortions tore the Accord formation apart, rendering their precise, formation-based tactics useless. Gorlak's fleet was suddenly adrift in a storm of broken physics and relentless fire. The Terran ships closed in, not with elegant maneuvers, but with terrifying, direct vectors. They traded broadsides at point-blank range. Accord shields flared and died under the brute force assault. Their elegant hulls were punched through by kinetic slugs and sheared apart by violet plasma. On the bridge of the Terra's Reckoning, Admiral Silva watched the tactical display, a symphony of controlled violence. Focus fire on their command ship. Break their spine. 3 Terran dreadnoughts, including the Reckoning, converged on Gorlak's flagship, the final verdict. The Accord vessel fought valiantly, its point defense lasers creating a lattice of light, its plasma cannons roaring. But it was like a fencer trying to stop an avalanche. The Terran ships absorbed the punishment, their adaptive shields glowing white-hot but holding. Then, they fired their rift cannons in a synchronized burst. Space around the final verdict twisted, screamed, and unfolded. For a fraction of a second, the beautiful ship existed in 3 different points of reality simultaneously, before the contradictory forces pulled it into a knot of superdense debris. Gorlak and his crew were erased from existence. The remaining Accord ships, leaderless and shattered, attempted to flee. But the skip-jump drives of the Terrans allowed them to appear at the system's edge, blocking the escape routes. A final, grim message went out from the Accord's surviving vice admiral: "We surrender. Cease fire." The response from Silva was immediate. No, the bridge officers looked at him. He met their gazes, his own eyes reflecting the silent explosions of dying ships on the viewscreen. They came to exterminate a world. To make an example of our children. They do not get to surrender. They get to be the example. Total annihilation. Leave one ship, the most damaged. Let it carry the news home. The order was carried out with chilling efficiency. When the last plasma fires died in the void, only a single, crippled Accord frigate remained, its transmitters screaming the horror back to the heart of the galaxy. Weeks later, that frigate limped into the space before the Celestial Accord's homeworld. It broadcast not just its sensor logs, but a new, clear message from the Terran leadership. This time, it was a human face: Admiral Kaito Silva, his features hard as lunar rock. Celestial Accord. You banished us. You thought us dead. You were wrong. You have seen the strength of our arm. Now understand the depth of our memory. We have not forgotten the Gola. We have not forgotten our stolen colonies. We have not forgotten the sentence you passed on a species for the crime of compassion. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing across the light years. Your quarantine is over. We have dissolved it from our side. Your monopoly on power is over. We stand now as the Terran Star Empire, sovereign and undeniable. We hold the waste. We hold the loyalty of those you have crushed under your heel. We do not seek your empty throne. We seek a new galaxy. He paused, letting the weight of the ruined fleet behind him sink in. Here are our terms. Disband the Accord High Council. Relinquish all claims on the systems of the former human colonies and the species you have designated client states. Surrender the Terran and all other species directly responsible for the Gola genocide to face Terran justice. Do this, and a new Congress will be formed, an equal Congress, where law is not dictated by antiquity, but built on justice. Refuse, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, and we will not siege your worlds. We will not fight your fleets in glorious battle. We will dismantle your civilization bolt by bolt. We will give every oppressed species the tools to break your chains. We will turn your garden into a wilderness. You have one standard cycle to decide. The banished have returned. And we will have our due. The transmission ended. In the high sanctum, the silence was absolute, deeper than the void outside. The invincible, eternal Accord was facing not just a military defeat, but an existential threat. The humans weren't just fighting for a place at the table, they were ready to burn the table down and build a new one from the ashes. Speaker Valerius looked at the stunned, fearful faces of the galaxy's masters. The seed they had tried to bury had not only sprouted, it had grown into a forest of iron, and its shadow now fell across their eternal city. The story they had ended a century ago had just entered its most terrifying chapter.